Athena is remembered in the pages of Greek mythology as the noble goddess of wisdom, strategy, and war. She is the patron of Athens, the protector of heroes like Odysseus, the divine figure who supposedly brought order to chaos and gave mankind the blessing of intellect. Statues show her standing tall with spear and shield, an owl perched by her side, her eyes unflinching in their calm superiority. To many, she represents the very best of the human spirit, the ability to think, to plan, to rise above brute force. But beneath this polished image lies a story most have never been told. A story that challenges everything we assume about who Athena really was and what she truly represented. The Greeks worshipped her as the embodiment of wisdom, but the question remains, what kind of wisdom was she truly the guardian of? Was it the wisdom of light, revelation, and divine truth? Or was it the wisdom of cunning, manipulation, and hidden control? The ancients did not draw a clear line between intellect and deception, between strategy and scheming. And Athena, born not from the womb, but from the fractured skull of Zeus, was unlike any other god or goddess, an artificial birth that hints at something far more unsettling than the heroic image carved in marble. Her myths reveal contradictions that most storytellers conveniently ignore. She was a virgin goddess, untouched, unyielding, free from the vulnerability of love and human desire. Yet she dominated the lives of men through war and counsel. She stood for law and justice, but she also sanctioned the cold calculation of battle. She punished without mercy, turned rivals into monsters, and wielded the serpent and the spear with equal authority. If Ares was the raw chaos of bloodlust, Athena was the sophisticated cruelty of controlled destruction, the kind of warfare that cloaks itself in the language of order and necessity. But why does this matter today? Because myths are not just stories, they are codes. They reveal the archetypes that civilizations carry, the spiritual powers that shape empires, and the deceptions that blind entire generations. When we strip away the marble mask of Athena, we begin to see a darker archetype emerge, one that whispers of counterfeit wisdom, of power disguised as righteousness, of war justified as justice. And as we compare her image to the biblical understanding of true wisdom, a wisdom rooted not in domination, but in the fear of the Lord, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Tonight, we are not simply exploring a myth, we are exposing a pattern. And by the end of this journey, you may never look at the goddess of wisdom the same way again. In the grand tapestry of Greek mythology, Athena holds a position unlike any other deity. She was not born in the ordinary way, through divine union or the natural cycles of fertility. Instead, the myth tells us she sprang fully grown, fully armed, from the cracked skull of Zeus after he swallowed her mother. Medea, the goddess of cunning and craft. This violent and unnatural birth immediately sets her apart, and it is no coincidence that her origin story has puzzled scholars, theologians, and mystics for centuries. For some, it symbolizes the triumph of intellect over instinct, a daughter not of flesh, but of pure mind. For others, it represents something more disturbing, a goddess manufactured from violence, intellect torn away from nurturing, wisdom severed from compassion. Athena quickly became one of the most revered figures in the Greek pantheon. She was the patron goddess of Athens, the city that took her name after a contest with Poseidon. In that myth, Poseidon offered the people of the city a saltwater spring, a symbol of might and maritime power, while Athena gave them the olive tree, a gift of peace, sustenance, and civilization. The Athenians chose her gift, and ever since she was enshrined as the guardian of the city that became the cultural and intellectual heart of Greece. Yet even here, one must notice the tension. The olive tree is a symbol of peace, but it is also the resource that fueled commerce, empire, and wealth, tools of power as much as of nourishment. Her image was everywhere in Athens, carved on coins, raised in statues, and etched into the identity of the people. The Parthenon, that enduring monument atop the Acropolis, was her temple, a place where civic pride and divine reverence intertwined. To honor Athena was to honor not just the goddess, but also the Athenian state and its empire. In this way, Athena was not just a goddess of wisdom, she was a goddess of statecraft, of national identity, and of the subtle fusion of religion and politics. Wisdom, in her name, became inseparable from authority, strategy, and control. The myths portray her as a strategist rather than a brute. Unlike Ares, the god of raw bloodlust, Athena represented the disciplined side of war, the general's mind rather than the soldier's rage. She was credited with guiding heroes such as Odysseus, offering him clever counsel during the Trojan War. She assisted Perseus in slaying Medusa, not by brute force, but by gifting him a polished shield to reflect the monster's gaze back upon herself. She was the embodiment of tactical advantage, of intelligence used to conquer. Yet there is an unsettling undercurrent here. What happens when intelligence serves destruction? What does it mean when wisdom itself becomes a weapon? The Greeks elevated Athena as a model of justice, but her sense of justice was not always gentle. In the Oresteia by Aeschylus, Athena intervenes in the cycle of blood vengeance by establishing the court of the Areopagus, where reason and law replaced endless cycles of retribution. This is often celebrated as the triumph of civilization over savagery. And yet, even here, one might question whether her justice was impartial or whether it simply shifted the balance of power from blood feud to state-sanctioned authority. The power to define justice can be as dangerous as the sword. Thus, when we look at Athena in the myths, we see a figure who embodies paradox, wisdom and war, peace and control, justice and domination. She is the goddess who embodies the best and the worst of human civilization, intellect that builds and intellect that destroys. To the Greeks, she was their divine protector, but to us, she becomes a mirror that reflects uncomfortable truths about the ways wisdom can be corrupted into power, and how strategy can disguise cruelty behind the mask of order. When most people think of Athena, the word that comes to mind is wisdom. She was the goddess of wisdom, the patroness of intellectual clarity, the divine figure whose very presence signified rational thought and strategic brilliance. But to understand what the ancients meant by wisdom is to uncover something far more complex and perhaps far more troubling. For the Greeks, wisdom was not only about truth or enlightenment. It was also about cunning, manipulation, and the ability to outthink an opponent. Athena's wisdom was never neutral. It was a weapon, sharp as the spear she carried, and always directed toward the aims of control. Her very symbols give us clues. The owl, perched eternally at her side, is widely celebrated as the emblem of wisdom. But the owl is also a nocturnal predator, a creature of the night that hunts in silence and strikes without warning. The owl does not represent compassion or guidance. It represents watchfulness, surveillance, and predatory focus. To the Athenians, the owl may have symbolized their goddess's far-seeing intellect. But to us, it also suggests a wisdom that sees in the dark, a knowledge that can peer into shadows and exploit what others cannot see. True wisdom, as the Bible reminds us, begins with the fear of the Lord. But Athena's wisdom, born of Zeus's fractured skull, is wisdom severed from reverence. It is intellect without humility, intelligence without submission to the divine. This is not a minor distinction. In the book of Proverbs, wisdom is personified as a woman who calls out in the streets, offering understanding, offering life, warning of the snares of folly. This wisdom is rooted in relationship with God, in truth that heals and uplifts. But in the Greek tradition, Athena's wisdom is transactional, tactical, and detached from moral absolutes. She guided Odysseus with clever deceptions, not with truth. She rewarded Perseus not with courage, but with a mirror shield of trickery. Her wisdom does not save the soul, it secures the victory. It is a kind of counterfeit wisdom that looks impressive, but does not align with eternal truth. This mask of wisdom was appealing to the Greeks because it validated their cultural ideals. Athens prided itself on its philosophy, its democracy, its rational discourse. To have a goddess who represented intellect gave divine sanction to their way of life. But the mask hid a deeper reality. Wisdom used as a justification for empire. Athens built its power not only on culture, but on conquest. Its navy dominated the Aegean. Its politics often veered toward manipulation, and its democracy was sustained by the labor of slaves. Behind the noble mask of wisdom was the machinery of control. Athena was not just their goddess, she was their justification. It is no surprise, then, that her image still lingers in modern times. The owl appears on seals, government buildings, and institutions of knowledge. Her figure stands in courthouses and capitals, the silent reminder that the wisdom of statecraft is often wisdom that serves power. Yet the Bible warns us that the wisdom of the world is foolishness to God. What the world calls wise, God calls deception. What the world calls strategy, God calls vanity. The mask of wisdom is seductive, but it leads us away from truth. When we peel back Athena's mask, we begin to see her for what she truly represents. Not wisdom in its pure form, but wisdom twisted into something cold, calculated, and dangerous. And if the ancients exalted her as their highest ideal, What does that reveal about the spiritual forces guiding them? More importantly, what does it warn us about the spiritual forces still guiding our world today? If Ares represented the savage chaos of war, bloodlust, rage, and the roar of battle, Athena embodied something more insidious, the polished mask of civilized conflict. She was the goddess of strategy, of calculated moves, of the general's map rather than the soldier's sword. To the Greeks, this distinction elevated her above Ares, for her war was supposedly tempered with reason. Yet this is precisely where the danger lies. For what is more destructive than war, cloaked in the language of necessity, justice, and wisdom? Athena's role in the Trojan War reveals this hidden face. While Homer's Iliad often emphasizes the brutality of Ares, it is Athena who manipulates events behind the scenes. She deceives warriors, fans the flames of conflict, and pushes battles forward with cunning precision. When Achilles and Hector faced one another in their fateful duel, Athena intervened by tricking Hector into believing he had an ally at his side. In truth, he was alone, betrayed by the goddess's deception, and walked willingly to his death. This was not the wisdom of guidance, but the wisdom of manipulation, the kind of intellect that leads men into traps while convincing them it is their own choice. In another myth, Athena aids Odysseus not by giving him strength, but by teaching him how to lie, disguise, and manipulate. His famed cunning, celebrated in Greek lore, was a gift of Athena, a gift of deception sanctified as divine wisdom. War, under her influence, became not merely a contest of arms, but a contest of deceit, where victory justified any means. This was not the raw savagery of battle, but the cold calculation of a strategist who views human lives as pieces on a board. Athena's rivalry with Ares is often portrayed as a battle between reason and chaos, order and destruction. But in reality, both sides were destructive. Ares may have reveled in the madness of combat, but Athena legitimized war by wrapping it in strategy and law. One was barbaric, the other was bureaucratic. One unleashed carnage openly, the other institutionalized it under the banner of justice. The end result, however, was the same: blood spilled, lives broken, civilization scarred. Her war was not the absence of violence, it was violence dressed in reason, which can be far more dangerous because it hides its true cost until it is too late. This distinction matters because it exposes the nature of hidden war. History has repeatedly shown us that the most enduring conflicts are not fought with open brutality but with careful calculation, with legal decrees, with the manipulation of narratives that justify the bloodshed. Athena embodies this archetype: the war that convinces you it is peace, the battle that disguises itself as necessity, the violence that claims to be justice. In this sense, Athena was not merely a goddess of war, she was a goddess of propaganda, an ancient reminder that the pen and the plan can be as lethal as the sword. The Bible reminds us that Satan disguises himself as an angel of light, presenting lies as truth and destruction as salvation. Athena's role in Greek mythology is eerily similar. She presents war as reason, deception as wisdom, and manipulation as guidance. what the Greeks revered as divine strategy, we can now recognize as the dark face of war hiding behind a mask of order. It was not only armies she commanded, but the very perception of truth itself. And when war is fought in the mind long before it reaches the battlefield, the goddess of wisdom reveals her darkest form. Athena has often been celebrated as the archetype of the powerful woman, the eternal virgin goddess who stood above the passions and vulnerabilities of mortal existence. She was independent, untouchable, and utterly devoted to her ideals of reason and strategy. Yet beneath this image lies a shadow that few are willing to confront. Athena represents a distorted feminine, stripped of nurturing and compassion, transformed into a weapon of control and domination. She is a warning of what happens when power severs itself from the life-giving aspects of the feminine and embraces only cold intellect. Unlike goddesses such as Demeter, who embodied fertility, or Aphrodite, who represented love and desire, Athena rejected all ties to the womb, to relationship, to intimacy. She was born not of woman, but of man's head, bypassing the natural feminine entirely. This was not an accident of mythology. It was a statement. The Greeks fashioned Athena as the ideal feminine that served patriarchal order, loyal to Zeus, aligned with the authority of the state, and divorced from the dangerous unpredictability of love, fertility, or emotional depth. She was a woman in form, but not in essence, a feminine archetype sterilized and weaponized for the sake of empire. Her virginity, often praised as purity, can also be read as absence, the refusal to embody the fullness of the feminine. She did not nurture life, she calculated war. She did not comfort the broken, she punished the guilty. She became the ideal woman in a society that feared women's true power, because she had surrendered her womb for a spear, her heart for a shield. In this, she foreshadows a dark archetype that has repeated itself throughout history. The exaltation of intellect severed from empathy, of authority severed from tenderness, of order severed from love. We see echoes of this archetype in other traditions. Lilith, in Hebrew lore, is remembered as the rebellious feminine who refused to submit, but over time became demonized as a figure of destruction. Jezebel, in the biblical narrative, is the manipulative queen who twisted influence into idolatry and control. In both, the feminine divorced from God becomes not life-giving, but destructive. Athena stands in this same lineage of the dark feminine, presenting herself as righteous while concealing a deeper fracture. Wisdom without love, authority without mercy. Even in her myths, this distortion reveals itself. When Medusa was violated in Athena's temple, it was not the perpetrator who suffered Athena's wrath, but Medusa herself, cursed into a monster. Here, Athena becomes not the protector of women, but their judge. Not the guardian of innocence, but the enforcer of shame. This is not divine wisdom. This is cold justice that abandons compassion. It is the shadow side of the feminine, turned against itself, reinforcing the very structures it should resist. For a culture like Athens, this archetype was convenient. Athena symbolized the perfect partner for empire. She brought the brilliance of intellect without the burden of empathy, the power of authority without the chaos of love. the order of law without the complications of relationship. But what is exalted as ideal in one age often reveals itself as distortion in another. The dark feminine archetype is dangerous because it looks virtuous, but it hollows out the soul. It promises order, yet breeds alienation. It offers clarity, yet blinds the heart. The Bible contrasts this distortion with the true wisdom embodied in Proverbs, where wisdom is personified not as sterile or domineering, but as a woman who calls people to life, who warns, who nurtures, who brings healing. The difference is profound. One is a mask that enforces control. The other is a spirit that brings ritual. And the more we look at Athena, the more we realize her celebrated strength may have been her greatest shadow, a warning about what happens when the feminine is severed from its divine root. One of the most overlooked yet revealing aspects of Athena's mythology is her connection to serpents. On her shield, the Aegis, the head of Medusa glares with petrifying eyes, turning all who gaze upon it into stone. At her feet, ancient depictions often show a serpent coiled as her companion, sometimes even intertwined with her protective symbols. To the casual observer, these details seem like mere mythic decoration. But in reality, they hint at a deeper archetype, one that intertwines wisdom, fear, and deception. The serpent, across ancient traditions, has always carried a double meaning. In some cultures, it represents renewal and healing because of its ability to shed its skin. Yet in the Bible, the serpent is the deceiver of Eden, the one who promises hidden wisdom but delivers ruin. Athena's bond with serpents cannot be dismissed as coincidence. If she is the goddess of wisdom, then the serpent becomes the shadow of that wisdom, the cunning intelligence that misleads, the knowledge that petrifies rather than liberates. Nowhere is this clearer than in the story of Medusa. Medusa was once a maiden violated within Athena's temple. Rather than punishing the violator, Athena turned Medusa into a monster, her hair writhing with serpents, her face cursed to petrify anyone who dared to look. What does this reveal? Athena weaponized the serpent as a tool of judgment, taking a victim of injustice and transforming her into a symbol of fear. Instead of compassion, there was cruelty. Instead of wisdom, there was terror. And it was Perseus, armed with Athena's guidance, who used trickery to slay her. This is not a story of divine justice. It is a story of wisdom corrupted into punishment, where serpents embody the distortion of truth into dread. The serpent also appears in Athena's role as a city guardian. Ancient Athenians believed a sacred serpent lived in the Parthenon, representing the spirit of their city under her protection. If the serpent refused food offerings, it was seen as a dire omen. Here again, Athena's wisdom is bound up with serpentine imagery, watchfulness, hidden power, and the threat of wrath if neglected. Wisdom becomes surveillance, and protection becomes control. The serpent is both guardian and captor, both ally and oppressor. The biblical contrast could not be sharper. In Eden, the serpent tempted Eve with the promise of hidden wisdom. Your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God. That false wisdom led to exile and death. Athena's myths echo the same pattern. She offers guidance, but it often comes through deception, fear, or manipulation. The serpent's whisper is not about truth, but about control. Not about life, but about domination. Her wisdom may shine like gold, but at its core lies the same ancient voice that says, "Knowledge alone will make you free," when in reality, it only deepens the chains. This serpent connection also explains why Athena's archetype persisted through empires. The Romans worshipped her as Minerva, linking her with imperial authority. Secret societies adopted her symbols of the owl and serpent, cloaking their pursuit of power in the guise of hidden knowledge. Even today, serpentine wisdom appears in the emblems of institutions, governments, and esoteric orders. The serpent still whispers, still watches, still disguises control as enlightenment. Athena's bond with serpents is not a side note. It is a revelation. It shows us that her so-called wisdom was inseparable from fear, that her justice was inseparable from cruelty, that her protection was inseparable from surveillance. The serpent is not merely at her side, it is within her very archetype. And when we understand this, we begin to see her not just as a goddess of wisdom, but as a guardian of a counterfeit wisdom, one that paralyzes rather than frees. As the Greek world faded and Rome rose to power, Athena did not disappear. She merely changed her name. The Romans called her Minerva, and under this guise, she became a pillar of the imperial cult. She was invoked not only as a goddess of wisdom, but also as a patron of military discipline, statecraft, and hidden knowledge. The empire embraced her because she represented precisely what it needed to justify its dominance. Intellect harnessed for control, strategy baptized as virtue, and conquest reframed as order. Through Minerva, Rome carried Athena's archetype into its law courts, its legions, and its temples of authority. But her shadow did not stop there. In the medieval world, as Christianity spread across Europe, echoes of Athena's archetype re-emerged within secret orders, guilds, and societies that claimed to guard ancient wisdom. Her symbols, the owl, the serpent, the shield, slipped quietly into the iconography of hidden traditions. Athena became less a goddess to be worshipped and more a symbol to be invoked, a silent patroness of knowledge kept for the few, never to be shared with the many. Knowledge that was once called wisdom became secrecy, veiled in rituals and codes, guarded by oaths. In this way, Athena's archetype was preserved not in open temples, but in the hidden chambers of elites who believed power belonged only to those who controlled information. We can still see her imprint in modern times. Look at the architecture of government buildings, where statues of Minerva stand as silent guardians of justice and law. Look at the owl, perched on the seal of institutions that claim to guard knowledge, yet often serve only to consolidate authority. These symbols are not random. They are echoes of an archetype that has survived for thousands of years, carried from Athens to Rome, from Rome to secret societies, and from those societies into the very structures of modern power. Athena, under many names, still walks among us, not as a literal goddess, but as a spirit, an idea, an archetype that continues to influence how humanity defines wisdom, justice, and authority. This persistence raises an unsettling question. Was Athena merely a myth, Or was she a mask for something far deeper? The Bible warns us of counterfeit wisdom, of spiritual forces that masquerade as light, but are rooted in deception. Could Athena represent one of these forces? A counterfeit of divine wisdom, a spirit that guides empires to clothe domination in the garments of justice? The parallels are hard to ignore. Where Christ offered truth that sets free, Athena offered wisdom that bound. Where divine wisdom nurtures life, Athena's wisdom orchestrated war. Where the Spirit of God reveals openly, Athena's legacy is hidden, veiled, secretive. Prophetically, her archetype points to a larger pattern: humanity's recurring temptation to embrace counterfeit wisdom. From Eden to Athens, from Rome to our own institutions, the same pattern repeats: the promise of knowledge without God, enlightenment without humility, order without compassion. It is the same pattern the serpent offered in Eden, the same lie dressed in new symbols. Athena is not just a figure of the past. She is a warning about the present, and this is why her story matters. To expose Athena is to expose the counterfeit wisdom that still shapes our world, the archetypes that still whisper through politics, warfare, and secret traditions. By recognizing her mask, we can begin to see through the illusions of wisdom that are not rooted in truth. For the Bible tells us clearly, the wisdom of this world is foolishness to God. And unless wisdom is rooted in Him, it will always lead us back to the same place: war, domination, and deception dressed in light. We began this journey with the shining image of Athena, the noble goddess of wisdom, the virgin of strategy, the protector of Athens. Yet, as we peeled back the layers of myth and symbolism, another story emerged, one far darker, one far more relevant to us today. Athena, for all her glory, does not represent wisdom in its truest form. She represents wisdom twisted into control, intelligence wielded as a weapon, justice cloaked in domination. She is the polished mask that hides the serpent's whisper, the archetype of counterfeit wisdom that humanity has exalted for centuries. When we look at her myths with clear eyes, we see patterns that repeat themselves throughout history. Athena guided wars not with compassion, but with manipulation. She punished the innocent, cursed the broken, and rewarded deception as if it were brilliance. She was the goddess of order, but it was an order rooted in power, not love. She was the guardian of cities, but she guarded them through surveillance and fear. And though the Greeks believed she was their highest ideal, her legacy reveals how easy it is for humanity to confuse true wisdom with cleverness and true justice with control. The Bible offers us a sharp contrast. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, Proverbs tells us. True wisdom is not born from the head of a violent God, but from reverence, humility, and surrender to the divine. True wisdom is not sterile, cold, or manipulative. It is life-giving, compassionate, and rooted in truth. Where Athena's wisdom turned Medusa into a monster, God's wisdom restores the brokenhearted. Where Athena's wisdom justified war, God's wisdom calls us to peace. Where Athena's wisdom cloaks power in secrecy, God's wisdom is revealed in the open, a light that no darkness can extinguish. This is why her story is not just ancient history. Athena's archetype still lingers in our world, in the halls of power, in institutions that claim to serve justice, but often serve control, in philosophies that glorify intellect while rejecting God. The owl still watches, the serpent still whispers, and the world still bows to a counterfeit wisdom that promises light but delivers chains. The question, then, is not simply who Athena was, but what she represents in our own lives. Which wisdom do we follow? The wisdom of the world, sharp and cunning, or the wisdom of God, humble and eternal? By unmasking Athena, we uncover more than the secret of a goddess. We uncover the battle for the very definition of wisdom itself. And in that battle, only one truth will set us free.